Hello, how was your day today? John DCQR reporting from somewhere in Toronto. On January 17, 2010, the Tunisian police arrested 12 so-called boar hunters that were of Swedish, French, and Dutch descent. Evidence later showed that they were accused of being agents provocateurs from Royal Dutch Shell and other intelligence agency. This happens to segue quite nicely of the topic I want to talk about today. This topic would be called the West's Dirtiest Little Secret, called the Nazi-Communist Mafia, and it's a long and sordid history. First, I will do a series on this, but first I will give you an introduction. Yes, it is and it's all connected to the dope trade. It is well known that the board rooms and secret societies direct the international dope cartel from both sides of the Iron Curtain. It is now appropriate to descend into the black market gutters through which the poison is passed. Here we will discover the most deeply held secret behind the over $500 billion dope Inc. empire. International drug trafficking, arms smuggling, and terrorism are central through the networks that control the Lausanne, Switzerland-based Nazi International. It should come to no surprise to the reader who has fully grasped the murderous impact of the multi-billion-dollar narcotics cartel that the very same oligarchical families east and west who sponsored Hitler's rise to power and who were never brought to the dockets of Nuremberg hatched a post-world opium war against the United States to continue the same genocidal policies by different means, and most certainly the entire world. In the course of unraveling this previous untold story on how organized crime is politically organized, the reader will discover that Swiss Nazi Francois Genad, under the protective umbrella of Alan Dulles, and British Special Operations Executive Sir William Stevenson, transferred to Hitler and Goebbels' trusts in the Swiss banks under a secret peace that began 2 years before the end of World War II and became the basis for the near-instant revival of the post-war Nazi or Malmo International. Genad's Nazi International, along with the Tashkent Institute of the Soviet Union's KGB Islamic Division and the British Arab Bureau, and most importantly the American CIA, sponsored and controls the Islamic fundamentalist apparatus running a major international assassination capability, as well as the multi-billion-dollar Golden Crescent route of heroin and hashish running from West Asia and the Persian Gulf into Western Europe. The same Nazi-communist connections runs an international army of smugglers and assassins organized into integrist and separatist cells banded together under the Endangered Peoples Society, which has connections, of course, to a couple of organizations called the Safari Club, in which the late Saddam Hussein was a member, which was probably why there was never any real investigation of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and it was in everyone's interest to say that there was none, because that would have opened up more can of worms. But moving on. The same not yep, and I will also talk about the same Nazi-Communist connection. Oh yep. Don't mind me, I lost track. These integrist cells are today carrying out a secret war against every sovereign nation in the West, all financed through the revenues of dope Inc. In fact, these integrist groups, following on the Golden Triangle model, have become the preferred international smuggling apparatus for all forms of drugs. This Nazi-Communist connection makes up the heart of the International Assassination Bureau that we will discover in detail in a later chapter. Among its victims and near victims, just to name a few examples, President John F. Kennedy, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, President Anwar Sadat, President Charles de Gaulle, Ronald Reagan, Pope John Paul II, and Yitzhak Rabin. That's just to name a few examples. The key to understanding the pivotal role of the Nazi International today is the concept of derivative networks. British secret intelligence, the Swiss doping bankers, the Soviet Union's ruling elite, the British East India Company faction within the United States, and even a faction of Israeli intelligence all have a standing agreement to foster, protect, and jointly reap the benefits of the dirty business run through the Nazi International. And one can't forget the Vatican. But moving on. By virtue of this arrangement, none of the controlling partners showed their hands directly in some of the most hideous crimes of the post-war period. That's World War II, of course. Crimes ordered by the Anglo-Swiss Soviet Hobbesian alliance, but carried out at a respectable distance by Nazi international derivative networks. For the average reader and even many intelligence professionals today, the term Nazi-Communist seems a strange contradiction. Yet from the 1920s to the end of World War II, U.S. military intelligence maintained an ongoing high-priority file classification: Synarchist International, Nazi-Communist. A decade before the short-lived public alliance called the Hitler-Stalin Pact, American G2 documents, now publicly available at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., showed that in every far corner of the globe, Anglo-Soviet Comintern agents were in active collaboration with leading figures in the Nazi Party and later the Gestapo. The case of Hermann Urban is exemplary. Born in Austria around the turn of the century, Urban joined the Nazi Party in Austria in 1926, shortly before he moved to the United States. From the United States, he renewed his party status. As a Hitler spy in the USA, Mexico, and the Far East, Urban financed his activities by smuggling morphine and other drugs, using his cover as a ship physician to facilitate the trade. By 1930, he was on every Federal Bureau of Narcotics watch list in Latin America and the Pacific. Throughout the 1930s, Urban traveled with his lifelong friend, actor Errol Flynn, to Spain, where they served on the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War. While Urban's switching sides has been passed off by some authors as yet another Nazi spy mission, by no later than the 1930s, Urban was working on behalf of both Nazi and Soviet interests. According to U.S. Naval Intelligence reports filed in Mexico City during the period of the Hitler-Stalin Pact from 1939 to 1941, Erben was at the center of a Gestapo Comintern plot to destabilize the southern borders of the U.S. through acts of sabotage and a potential limited military incursion. Forced to flee North America, Erben next surfaced in Shanghai, where he spent the duration of the war working for both the Gestapo and a Soviet spy, Richard Sorge. Arrested by U.S. Army counterintelligence in Shanghai at the close of the war, Erben was shipped back to Bremerhaven, West Germany, to be put on trial for war crimes. On his arrival, however, he was mysteriously freed on medical assignment in Austria. Circumstantial evidence points to the Allen Dulles group in an Anglo-American intelligence who had by 1943 initiated a separate peace with a faction of the Nazi apparatus in anticipation of recruiting Nazis into the post-war Anglo-American efforts, including a post-war universal fascism project. Yes, the Galen-Orr was most certainly a part of it. And as a curious note, Reinhard Galen was also very good friends of a man connected to the White Russians, Prince Anton Turkel, who in turn had long connections for Russian intelligence. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, and I'll talk about that in another show. In 1950, we find Erben living and working in Iran, probably under the sponsorship of former Nazi economics minister and Dulles crony Hjalmar Schacht. During this period, Erben converted from Judaism. He was born into an Austrian Jewish family that included a cousin who was the first wife of Anglo-Soviet triple agent Kim Philby, and he converted, of course, to Islam. Curiously, during the same period, Erben applied to have his United States citizenship reinstated. It had been pulled by the U.S. Attorney General in the early 1930s based on his Nazi espionage activities. The application was rejected on the grounds that Erben was a known Soviet spy. Did you get that? This will be very important. The closest Erben ever got to the USA was the Caribbean island of Barbados, where he spent much of the 1970s working for the Bronfman Family Space Research Corporation, a dope Inc. front involved in smuggling sophisticated arms into South America, Latin America, and the East Bloc. Space research was also shut down in the late 1970s as a result of a joint criminal investigation by the U.S. and Canadian governments. The reader protests. The case of Dr. Erben is an exception, a fluke. Certainly the Nazi International, if indeed it exists today, cannot be in bed with both Washington and London, and as a side note, they're most certainly in bed with the Vatican. But be patient, the author. Be patient. Follow the drug routes from the opium fields of the Islamic fundamentalist havens of Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, into the refineries in Turkey. Follow the drug trafficking routes unimpeded through the Iron Curtain, the Bulgaria and Yugoslavia, before the drug passes through the west through northern Italy and the Bavaria, Sicily, and Corsica. Yes, and the routes are still the same today. on to their ultimate destination on the inner city streets of North America. Trace the arm routes over the same path from Western and Eastern Europe into the terrorist havens of the Middle East. Then trace the trail of the assassin Muhammad Ali Adka back and forth over the same east-west trail. Illegal drugs, illegal arms, professional killers, and terrorists of every political stripe, all traversing the same dope-ink underground railroad. And NATO was certainly a huge component in that too. Hence look at the P2 scandal. Now return to the archives. Study the contraband routes as they existed during the Byzantine, Ottoman, and British Empires' undisputed dominions over Asia Minor, and you could all certainly throw in the Americans and Russians. The black market trails remained unchanged over the centuries. Finally, ask yourself, could such a trade flourish today to the point of being the world's biggest business unless powerful interests of both East and West were fully complicit? And we'll look at the case of Francois Ginat. During the between 1978 and 1979, the authors and researchers of Dope Inc. were the first to expose publicly the intimate interlinks between terrorism and the major drug running and gun running networks, which with much help from U.S. official drug enforcement agency files. Yes, they tracked down the drug running networks around the world and traced these historically to the opium trafficking practices of the British East India Company. I'll be back in a few seconds. Yep, I'm sorry about that. I was a little interrupted. Oh, now where was I? I'll start again. Yes, we'll start at the British East India Company, and it went into the elaborate offshore financial operations controlling the drug traffic today. Where was the center of this international traffic exceeding 200 billion a year? In the international side of the operations, as distinct from wholesale and resale trafficking within nations such as the United States. Gradually, the laborious process of triangulation focused our attention in Switzerland, and then more exactly on the headquarters of the present-day Nazi International Organization, a banker Francois Ginat in Lausanne, Switzerland. Ginat was an authentic hardcore Nazi. He was a prominent Nazi official in Switzerland during Adolf Hitler's rule in Germany, and emerged as a kind of general secretary for the reconstituted Nazi or Malmo International when that was resembled as a public association in Rome, Italy at the close of the 1940s. At about the same time in 1949, Dr. Armin Moller, formerly a Swiss volunteer in Hitler's Waffen-SS, produced his book, The Conservative Revolution in Germany from 1918 to 1933, as a doctoral dissertation under pro-Nazi Swiss philosopher Dr. Karl Barth. According to European accounts, Francois Ginat joined the Swiss Nazi Party, the National Front for Switzerland, at age 21. Financed by the Ultramer family of the Lombard Odier Bank of Geneva, the NFS would serve as a channel of contact between Alan Dulles and his former Nazi clients. Excuse me. In 1930, Gino set up a nightclub in Lausanne called the Oasis as a front for the German Abwehr. As a result of previous trips to the Middle East, in which he cultivated personal ties to the fanatically pro-Nazi anti-Semitic Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Gino's Oasis became a center for espionage and drug smuggling into the Middle East. By 1942, Gino Lausanne's operation expanded into the banking world. He facilitated the transfer of millions of marks from German to Swiss banks. These funds would later underrate the Odessa organization that smuggled countless top Nazi officials out of Germany into Spain, North Africa, South America, and the Middle East. These networks to this day make up the hardcore of the international drugs trafficking organization. For this bank and transfer and safe transit deposit project. I'll repeat it again. For this bank and transfer and safe transit project, a front company, Dythland Brothers Import-Export Port, was founded in Lausanne under the personal direction of Hitler's private secretary, Martin Bormann. Bormann was loyally serving Hitler, was almost undoubtedly also a Soviet agent who pushed as late as 1943 for a revival of the Hitler-Stalin Pact. The importance of this will become apparent as the Gino file unfolds. By 1943, Gino was in regular contact with SS General Karl Wolff and with Bern OSS Station Chief Alan Dulles, the former attorney for Nazi interests, including I.G. Farben and Schroeder's Bank. Dulles used Gino to mediate the post-war safe passage of thousands of top Nazis. Several unconfirmed reports placed Gino in contact with Lyon, France Gestapo chief Klaus Barbie during these wartime separate peace negotiations. After an apparently brief legal detention for his wartime Nazi activities, Gino revived his Arab world ties in the early 1960s, traveling to Morocco, Egypt, and Algeria with such Nazi notables as General Wolfgang Marschalk and Dr. Hans Reichenberg and of course Otto Skorzeny. We see the Bush is connected to this. I'll talk more about that at another show. It was also during this period that Gino facilitated the flow of millions of dollars to ex-Nazis hiding in South America and launched the first attempt reviving the Nazi International in the form of the Buenos Aires-based magazine Der Weg. By 1960, Gino had created a string of trading companies and political fronts, including the Society Interlogen SA, a Freiburg-based export-import company, and a Lausanne headquartered International Association of the Friends of the Arab World. The latter was co-founded by a longtime British intelligence agent with deep ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, Benoit Meshin. Under the direction of St. John Philby, top British Arabist and father of Kim Philby, Benoit Meshin had exhaustively profiled the Saud dynasty. Through this apparatus, Gino became a primary weapons trafficker to the Polisario. National Union of Popular Forces of Morocco, and the Algerian FLN. In 1960, using funds still remaining from the Hitler and Goebbels Trust, his more recent arms revenues, Gino set up the Banque Commerciale Arabe in Louvain, one of BCA's correspondent banks in Lebanon. Intrabank has been deeply implicated in arms and drug smuggling. Gino, in conjunction with Otto Scorsese, was deeply involved in arms sales to the French secret army organization OAS of Jacques Soustelle. At the same time, Gino and Scorsese were providing arms to Ahmed Ben Bella's FLN. One of Gino's cutouts in this trade was the Casino de la Ben, the Beirut gambling resort owned by Intrabank and notorious as the center of Middle Eastern hashish trafficking. Gino's bank and tie to the OAS raises an important question concerning his ties to French anthropologist and OAS leader Soustelle. NATO. According to exhaustive documents in the files of the U.S. Army G2 and the Office of Naval Intelligence, Soustelle was a leading Comintern agent in Mexico and South America throughout the 1940s. His name appearing on lists of known members of the Soviets' Red Orchestra spy net. Soustelle's name comes up peripherally as well in the 1940 assassination of Leon Trotsky in Mexico City. In 1941, however, Soustelle, his Comintern mentor Paul Rivet, and Jean de Menil all showed up in prominent positions within de Gaulle's Free French apparatus in Caracas, Rio de Janeiro, Mexico City, and Honduras, only later to facilitate the arrival of scores of Nazis and Vichyites into South America at the close of the war. It would be out of this Latin American swamp of ex-Nazis, Vichyites, and Comintern agents that the OAS would recruit and which would simultaneously make up the backbone of the infamous French Connection heroin ring. Nazi Gino and his BCA were in no way lacking in their own direct ties to Soviet intelligence and finance. For its own part, Moscow had not missed any opportunity at war's close to recruit major Nazi assets into Soviet and Eastern European military and intelligence ranks. Whole SS units were integrated and tacked for a period of time into the East German Army secret police apparatus. For some strange reason, I keep thinking of Ernst Zundel. But I want to finish off this sordid story. One-time Gino collaborator, Lieutenant General Otto Ernst Remmer, has emerged as a leading neo-Nazi advocate of reunification of Germany under Soviet hegemony. But Gino's primary known Soviet channel developed through his Arab terrorist ties. Beginning in the early 1970s, Gino expanded his arms and drug business in the Middle East in partnership with Intrabank. During this time, in part to cover his arms trafficking to a string of terrorist and separatist groups, Gino was brought into the Arab Union of Lawyers. In April 1969, at a Barcelona meeting of the neo-Nazi New European Order, founded by Gino agent Gaston Guy Amandrews, The Lausanne bankers sponsored a delegation from Al-Fatah and from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. At that meeting, Gino arranged for the Palestinians to receive training from several ranking ex-Nazis, including Karl Vandeput and Johann N. Schuler. In September 1969, Gino was brought in as a special advisor to the legal team defending 3 PFLP terrorists who had attacked an Israeli El Al plane in Zurich. The lead attorney defending the terrorists was Jacques Vergès, also known as Jacques Mansour. By no later than 1949, Vergès was a Soviet agent. At that time, he headed the Paris branch of the Lycéen Committee of Anti-Colonialist Students. 1 year later, Vergès was in Prague as a director of the International Student Union. His immediate boss was Alexander Shelepin, later head of the KGB. By 1957, back in Paris, Vergès was part of the KGB underground, then headed by Egyptian communist Henri Curiel, cousin of George Blake, soon to defect from British intelligence to the KGB as part of the Kim Philby network, sponsored first by the Comintern and later by the International Secretariat of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Curiel's Solidarity Group was a recruitment and logistical base for Soviet terrorist operations throughout Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and even Latin America. Curiel is credited with recruiting the Carlos terrorist network, the Organization of Arms, Struggle, and Action Direct, and of course the CIA, also armed and fund those same groups as well. Which further shows that during the so-called Cold War, the CIA and the KGB were working hand in hand. Also, like I said in the previous audio, Nikita Khrushchev once said that the CIA and the KGB should be merged into one organization because the same people worked for both organizations. Too late, Khrushchev. It was already happening even in your time. European sources have confirmed that by no later than 1958, Curiel and Gino were in active collaboration in conjunction with Amin Ben Bala of the FLN. Recall that during the same period, Gino was arming the OAS. With the founding of Gino's Bank Commercial Arab, Curiel laundered funds provided through his KGB control into the FLN through Gino's bank. Through Curiel, Vergès was installed in 1962 as an advisor to the Ben Bella government of Algeria, at which time he converted to Islam and took the name Jacques Mansour. For the next 15 years, Vergès floated between Maoist China. Mao sponsored a Vergès publication, Revolution, with offices in Beijing, Lausanne, New York, and Havana. See the collusion between the two major intelligence agencies of the world? Pol Pot's Cambodia. Pol Pot and Vergès were communist students together at the Sorbonne in the 1940s and retained personal ties afterwards. Black September and PFL training camps in the Middle East and Paris. In 1977, Vergès and Gino jointly pressured the Israeli government into releasing Carlos-linked terrorist Bruno Breguet, a Swiss national jailed for participation in a terrorist attack against an Al jet. By 1982, Breguet was back in jail in Paris for terrorist actions by the Action Direct Group and for possession of sophisticated Czech explosive devices. Vergès also served as the attorney for Nazi Klaus Barbie, who was put on trial in Lyon for war crimes, including the 1941 assassination of Jean Moulin, head of the Gaullist resistance. Vergès' introduction to Barbie came from François Chinot on February 6, 1983, just one day after Barbie's extradition to France from Bolivia, where he was an official in the Interior Ministry and deeply involved in cocaine trafficking. Barbie was but one Nazi-turned-Nazi narco-terrorist whose post-war career was fathered by Chinot. Chinot's apparatus encompasses scores of currently active terrorists and narcotics traffickers in South America, Europe, and the Middle East. When it comes to the world's biggest business, Dope Inc., red terrorists, black terrorists, Eastern Bloc secret police, and most certainly Western intelligence agencies and professional mafiosi all swim together. Yes, for now I'm a bit of a busy man, but this is just a brief introduction of what is happening currently in Tunisia. Of course, that would be something that WikiLeaks would never even do. And there, as in one of my earlier videos, there's also evidence that Julian Assange is connected to all this mess. Oh, and it will all be discussed. Don't you worry. Don't you be worrying about that. I will discuss it all. But for now, I'll leave it as brief introduction because I'm a little busy right now.